Hey everyone, Sean Ruggiero. We're going to go over a concept today that I think many people encounter out in the field. We're going to talk about rental properties. So rental properties, something as an investment, real estate investment versus indexed universal life. Now, I want to start by saying both have advantages and disadvantages. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Rental properties themselves, I think it's fantastic. I do believe in my experience, both with having rentals and knowing people have done rentals, especially single family residential. I think there's an allure or a sex appeal, if you will, that is probably inflated versus what the actual statistical results are. Now, real estate has been hot recently. In 2009, when the federal interest rates dropped down, with the interest rates dropping with COVID, with so much money available, the pricing of houses, especially in certain areas, certain pockets like North Idaho, where we live here, one of the hottest real estate markets in the United States, you've seen real estate climb dramatically. Real estate also does a good job of keeping up with inflation. We're experiencing high inflation. So please don't take this as I think real estate is a bad investment. I think real estate can be an excellent investment. But I do believe in two things. One, I think real estate, when you look long term and you look at the pros and the cons, it's got both, right? It is not the upper echelon. It's not the apex investment that I think it's sometimes made out to be. And also IULs can be a great investment. Now, what are we looking at? We're looking at long term. We're looking at how can real estate help you in retirement versus an IUL help you in retirement. So think about this. This is long term. This is not flipping houses. This is not primary residences. This is not second homes. And this is not saying that real estate is a bad investment. I'm just shining some light on it and trying to do some agnostic comparison. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about a rental property as an investment long term versus an indexed universal life long term. So let's say we purchased a house for $217,000. And let's compare that to an IUL that we had a starting death benefit of $217,000. Yes, I realize they're two different things. One is something you have to pay. The other is something that you would gain tax-free if you died. But it is a starting point. It has a similar value day one. Now, I went on to Bankrate or Zillow, I don't remember which one, and I calculated a true payment. Sometimes index universal life get notoriety or bad notoriety because people say, well, not all the money goes to cash accumulation. That's absolutely true, and I think that should be taken into consideration. But when you buy a rental property, not all the money goes to pay off principal. In fact, it's dramatically less in the amount of cash if you structure an IUL the correct way. So I think it's important to shine a light on that. In this instance, we have $177 going to private mortgage insurance. We have $67 going to homeowners insurance. These numbers can fluctuate, but you get the idea. And we have $217 go to taxes. So out of a $1,497 payment, let's call that $1,500. Out of that $1,500 payment, only about $1,036 is principal and interest. And a lot of that is interest. If you look at the amortization of a mortgage over 30 years, you're going to pay a lot of interest. And I'm going to illustrate that here. So an IUL, some of the money goes to death benefit, some of the money goes to policy fees, and some of the money goes to cash accumulation. With a rental property, some of the payment goes to taxes, some of the payment goes to interest, some of the payments goes to insurance. So you get the idea. Now, we're going to draw a comparison to try to keep these level, but we're going to show a $1,000 investment in an IUL. So a monthly payment of $1,500 in a rental property versus a monthly payment of $1,000 into the IUL. Both of them starting at the $217,000 mark. Now, at the end of 30 years, so let's say you take a 30-year mortgage and you ran it for 30 years. At the end of 30 years, you would have a paid-off house, and it would have taken $538,000 to pay it off. $538,000. If you take that $1,500 a month, times it by 12 months a year, times it by 30 years, that's where you're at, $538,000 and some change. Now, if we take that same 30 years and you pay into an index universal life, $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year, times it by 30, we're at $360,000. So that is an advantage to an IUL. You can get a little bit more bang for your buck. If I'm talking about the starting death benefit versus the starting mortgage, if I'm talking about being able to put in only $1,000 versus $1,500, I have laid out less cash, bottom line. And these numbers can change. You could put more, you could put less, you could have a more expensive rental property, you could have a less expensive rental property. My point is, when I compare these, I only put $1,000 a month or $360,000 in over the course of 30 years versus $538,000. So I retained more cash that I could have invested elsewhere or spent elsewhere. Now, what's the future value? Okay, we are experiencing hyperinflation. We are experiencing hyper appreciation, especially in certain pockets, like I said earlier, for real estate. It will not sustain at that rate. We're not going to see 14.5% annual appreciation on homes for the rest of these next 30 years. And we've seen some periods where it's been very slow, even negative a few years. But I think a fair comparison is a 4%. A 4% compounding growth rate or appreciation rate for real estate, that is a fair assessment. And so in 30 years, that $217,000 home is no longer $217,000. It's worth $676,000. Fair, wouldn't you agree? I think so. So you didn't pay $538,000 for a $217,000 asset. You paid $538,000 for a $676,000 asset. But what about the IUL? What about the Index Universal Life? It also grows. And what I took is I took purely the surrender value or cash value. I didn't take the death benefit because, if a rental property was only worth what you could die for, it's not as valuable. It's worth what you could sell it for. I took the actual cash value, the surrender value, at the end of 30 years, and we're using assumed basic average returns on both sides of the ledger here. At the end of 30 years, the Index Universal Life, which you paid significantly less for, is worth $1.136 million. All right? So if you cash out the house, you sell it, you pay some capital gains tax, long-term capital gains tax, hopefully more favorable than income, but you have an alternative here. You could cash out your IUL and you probably pay income tax on it, not as favorable, but still it's a significantly a larger amount of money that it's worth. It's worth 1.136. So to me, that's an advantage to an IUL. It's an advantage. It's going to outpace real estate appreciation over the course of 30 years if we look at the historical averages. Now let's look at income. Here is the biggest advantage. There's lots of disadvantages, but the biggest advantage to a rental property is you can start to receive income day one. All right. Now, so long as you have a renter, so long as they don't wreck the house, we can talk about all that stuff. Let's just talk about what's in the mean here, what the average return is going to be. We're looking at an average return, and I did have inflation. I did increase it for inflation every single year. All right. I think I used a 3% inflation rate. So the rental income, assuming that you rented it every month, every year for 3 decades. And that, there might be some times where you didn't rent it, but I'm just trying to be a little bit agnostic in this. And if you did that over the course of 50 years, that's 30 years of paying it off and then 20 years in retirement, you would have yielded $1.832 million in rental income. 1.832. So you can see why rentals are popular. You purchased it for $217. You had a $1,500 a month payment. Your total payments were a little over $500,000. The asset itself is worth almost $700,000. And over 50 years, it created $1.832 million of income. Well, you can also generate income with an Index Universal Life. I did this on a 35-year-old who was very healthy. A 35-year-old who's very healthy is about the age where you could possibly afford to purchase some rental income. It's also a great age to start something like an IUL or an Index Universal Life. Now, the 35-year-old is going to wait. They're going to wait till they retire. So in both cases, they pay for 30 years. Nothing changes that. That $1,000 a month outlay is paid for every month, every year for 30 years. That $1,500 a month outlay is paid for every month, every year for 30 years. Okay? The difference is we only take the income once we retire with the Index Universal Life. So you might say that's an advantage or a disadvantage. I think the advantage is that a rental property can get you income day one. But the disadvantage is it can't match the rate of income once you turn it on, once you turn that spigot on. So in 30 years, the IUL is done being paid for. You'll never put a dime into it. And now you start taking income out, and a significant amount. So if we run 20 years of income, matching that 50-year timeline, matching that 65 to 85 retirement timeline from retirement to death, you take out 2.661 million. 2.661 million, that is a lot more than 1.8 million, and it is tax-free when it's structured correctly. So let's look at the comparison side by side. We looked at the numbers, okay? We obviously pointed out that rentals have the biggest advantage of having income day one, but other than that, look at the scoreboard on the right side when it comes to an IUL. First and foremost, any income that does come from rental property is going to be taxed. If we look at the proper structure of an index universal life, it is tax-free income as well as a tax-free death benefit. If we look at the minutia, if you will, or the actual characterization of what we own, with a rental, you always have to manage renters and you have to have upkeep. Right? The roof needs to be replaced. The air conditioner needs to be replaced. Maybe there's a broken window. Maybe there's cracks in the cement. Maybe, there's a house fire. And that's very extreme, but you get my point. There is constant maintenance. There is no house out there that's going to last for 50 years and not need any maintenance. It's going to need maintenance. Do you need maintenance? Do you manage renters with an IUL policy? Absolutely not. One of the reasons I am so big into non-tangible investments, non-tangible things like IULs, like the stock market, like fixed index annuities, is because I don't ever have to worry about managing a renter. I don't ever have to worry about replacing an air conditioner, or if the refrigerator goes out, or if someone has their dog urinate on the carpet. Now, I know that sounds a little bit visceral, a little bit harsh, but that's the sort of things that you will deal with at some point when you are renting out a home, an asset that you have. You must keep it up. You don't need to do that with an IUL. And think about it. If you're in retirement, do you want to continue to manage renters? Do you want to continue to replace air conditioners and broken windows and cracks in the cement and replace the roof and all these different things that I mentioned? No, of course you don't. And if you're going to pass on an asset, how many people where the one spouse is the one that's managing the rentals, then they pass and they say, here you go, you've got a house with a renter, good luck managing it. That's probably the last thing someone wants to do when they have a loss of a spouse, someone they've been with for a long time. So when we start digging down through the layers of the advantages versus disadvantages, it's almost endless when it comes to the layers of having to manage renters, having to manage upkeep versus not having to do that. And that's why when we look at this, I'm not saying people shouldn't invest in real estate. I'm saying they should also be considering, or if someone is wavering between the two, these are things to consider down the road when you actually go to retire. Tax-free income, higher payouts of income, and no maintenance, no upkeep, no renters, etc. I mean, hands down, if we isolate it just to the retirement years, I don't think anyone would pick a rental. They would probably pick an IUL. And what if they die? Sure, you can pass on a deeded property to your loved ones, but there could be consequences from a tax or inheritance standpoint with an IUL that passes tax-free. And then finally, you're also going to be paying a lifetime of taxes and insurance that will climb, they will inflate, that will never go away. There is no lifetime of taxes and insurance. And in fact, a little known fact of an IUL is that as your cash value grows, and even if we have an increase in the death benefit grows, once you get to the point where you're no longer putting policies in, most IUL carriers will eliminate the policy fees. Once you get to the point where, yes, your variable premium will increase with the age, because you have so much cash that you own in that policy, the premium becomes very, very little because the burden to the insurance company becomes lower. They only have to pay out the difference between the promised death benefit and the cash value. So they actually become very, very affordable late in life. So anyways, if you have any questions, please email us. You want to get some illustrations, you need help with contracting, you can email us at info@FFLAMS, that's Family First Life Advanced Market Sales, so info@FFLAMS, or you can actually call us 208-551